Hey folks, John here again. I just wanted to do a quick follow-up video from my two previous Sigma FP videos where I looked at my initial impressions of the focusing both from a stills perspective as well as the video in terms of its auto continuous focusing. Now I got a lot of responses from that really went the entire range, right? From one side where people said, look, I shoot with manual focus lenses, or I put my kit into a rig. I don't really care about autofocus. I really want to focus on the quality that comes out of that camera. On the other end of the spectrum, there are people that said, I love this camera, I wanted to buy it, but now I can't because the continuous autofocusing is so bad in video. And I think this is what you're going to see out there. I think that the Sigma FP is going to create a polarizing reviews because of its modular component, the way it's been marketed as a camera that can fit everyone. And that's not necessarily true, right? Because everybody feels this camera has been marketed towards them. If you're a filmmaker and you see it in a rig, oh, that's my camera. If you're a vlogger and you see it on a gimbal, oh, that's my camera. If you're a drone pilot, and you see it on a drone, oh, so that's my camera, right? If you see it in stills mode, people say, oh, that's my camera. And I think that this creates certain expectations. And that's the whole point, is that when you look at this camera, it really depends on the mindset you have. Right? The requirements that you have, what you need this tool to do is going to determine what your perception of it is. And we've seen this happen before with other releases of equipment out there. If you guys remember the D750, Nikon D750, for example, when that was first announced, the YouTube lit up, the forums lit up, all the experts got out and they loved it. They absolutely loved it because the D700 was a much beloved camera. It was considered to be a baby D3. It had flagship capability at a fraction of the cost. And everybody thought, hey, we've been waiting forever for that thing to be upgraded. We finally got it. What we're going to see is flagship capabilities, which at that time was a D4, which was an amazing camera. Even by today's standards is really good. And they were going to get this huge $6,000 value in a $2,000 package, which from a business perspective doesn't make sense. But that's what everybody thought. So they all loved it. And then the spec sheets came out and all these experts did a 180-degree flip. They all hated it because they capped out the shutter at 4,000. They took the sync speed down to 200. They didn't have the pro configuration, which other than the ISO button on top, I could care less about. And so everybody flipped. They hated it. And then the camera was released and suddenly people loved it again because it had a beautiful sensor. It had autofocusing borrowed from the D4. It was faster than the 800 series. It could handle better low light focusing. It was better in low light performance. It had faster frame rates out of the box. It had the flippy screen, and everybody loved it. And then a little while later, the flaring popped up and the recall happened. Now everybody hated it. Now it's the worst camera ever made on the planet. And the fact of this, what's funny about it is that through this entire cycle, from the inception to the announcement, to the spec sheets, to the release, to the initial impressions, to the flaring and recall, to where it is today, that 750 never changed. It was always the same camera. I owned one. I got it the first week it came out. It was my full frame that I had before I got into the 810s. I shot with it for about a year or so. Never had the flaring issues. Sent it back. Nikon fixed it in 3 days, totally on their dime, which is all I could ask for a company. Stand behind your product when you do something wrong, and they did. And eventually I traded it in for my 500, so that's kind of where it went in my experience with it. But the point being is that it was a great camera, but people's review and perception of it changed almost as the wind blew, depending upon the spec or the recall or whether or not they used it. So all had to do with perception and mindset going into it. I think the Sigma FP is going to have that same kind of effect on people because the marketing was so broad, as this modular component can be any camera that you ever want it to be. And I'm already seeing that with people, the way they're responding and reviewing it. So for example, the Australian Image left a comment on my site that I very much agree with. And he was saying, look, I'm an old school. I shot medium and large format. I'm used to manual focus. I bought a Blackmagic. It's in a rig with a manual focus. I shoot manual focus photography. It's who I am. It's what I do. Autofocus is not important to me. It doesn't freak me out. And so for a person like that, I think they're excited by the possible opportunities that this camera can provide them at the cost point. Then you got the people kind of in the middle, people like Casey Stern from Camera Conspiracies, right? I'll put a link below. If you haven't seen his channel, go check it out. It's hilarious. He's a funny guy. I think he's a really honest individual when he does his reviews, but he's looking at it from a YouTube vlogger perspective. And he does a lot of walkabouts. And so for him, stabilization is important and focusing is paramount. And I think if you use this camera, 15 minutes later, he'd just throw it out the window in frustration. he would hate it. And then I see Steve Huff. If you haven't seen his review, he just did one. I'll put a link below again. And it's a great review. Steve looked at it from a stills perspective camera, kind of like I did with the focusing. He looked at the entire camera from that perspective, and he treated it like, it feels like the SL1, a kind of a Leica thing, but it's providing better results at a lower cost point. And he's in love with that camera. And I don't disagree with him on it. So here you have three very different reviews from people who would need different needs out of this camera. You have one person who's very excited as a filmmaker. I think you're going to have one person who's going to hate it as a YouTube vlogger, and another person who absolutely in love with it as a stills photographer. And that's kind of the point, right? Just because it didn't do well in continuous autofocusing on video, don't rate the camera off, right? If that is your primary requirement, I understand the camera's not for you, but there is so much other goodness I think that can come out of this camera. I personally am still excited by it. It fits the workflow that I'm doing. I love the modular approach. I love the results that I've already started to see out of the camera. And I'm just going to continue to keep pushing it and sharing my results with you guys. And hopefully you continue the journey with me. So again, always looking for feedback on what you guys want to do or see me do with the camera. And hopefully we'll be able to work it in the schedule. Thanks.